A woman sits in a Zurich consulting room describing a dream. In it, she was handed a piece of gold jewelry, a scarab beetle. As she says the word, there is a tapping at the window behind her analyst. He turns, opens it, and catches the insect flying in. A gold-green beetle, the nearest thing Switzerland has to a scarab, arriving at that pane of glass at the exact moment she reaches the scarab in her dream. He holds it out to her. "Here is your scarab." That analyst was Carl Jung, and for weeks that woman had been impossible to treat. Brilliant, highly educated, locked so tightly inside her own reasoning that nothing landed. She had a tidy, rational answer for everything he offered, and every answer kept the therapy at a safe distance and going nowhere. What she could not explain away was the beetle. There was no argument to win, nothing to reason away, just a live insect in her palm that had no business being there. The coincidence was so precise and so far outside anything she could account for that her over-reasoned defenses had nowhere left to stand. It let a bit of doubt and wonder in, and the analysis finally started to move. That it was a scarab mattered too. In ancient Egypt, the scarab is a symbol of death and rebirth, which is close to exactly the renewal her stuck treatment was reaching for. I want to talk about that man, because you probably know his name without knowing quite what he did. Jung gave us introvert and extrovert, the shadow, the archetypes, the idea that the second half of your life is meant to be spent becoming who you actually are. What far fewer people know is that he began as a hard-nosed psychiatrist, wiring patients up to instruments, and that he followed his own data somewhere far stranger than he ever meant to go. That story sits on the exact fault line he spent his whole career working, the line between what you can measure and what you can only live. Born in 1875, the son of a country pastor on a Swiss lake, he trained in medicine and in 1900 took a post at the Burg Hölzli, one of the most serious psychiatric hospitals in Europe. His first real contribution was measurement. He would read a patient a list of words, one at a time, and ask for the first word that came back, timing the reply with a stopwatch and, in some setups, tracking tiny changes in the skin's electrical resistance with a meter. Most words came back fast and clean, but certain words tripped the patient up, a pause, a stumble, a spike on the meter. And when Jung grouped the words that did it, they clustered around some sensitive theme the patient did not consciously know was there. He called it a complex. Here was a piece of the mind the patient could not report on, that they did not know they had, and it showed up on a stopwatch and a meter. The unconscious was not a philosopher's guess. It left a measurable fingerprint. That work made his name, and it matters because everything stranger that came later was built by the same man who started with a word list and a clock. When he later reported things that no meter could catch, he was not lowering his standards. He was telling you honestly that his instruments had run out before the territory did. That same work is what brought him to Sigmund Freud. In 1907, the two men met in Vienna and, by the story, talked for around 13 hours without a real break. Freud was 20 years older, the center of the young psychoanalytic movement, and he saw in Jung his heir, the man who would carry the work forward. For a few years, Jung was the crown prince, the first president of the International Psychoanalytical Association, Freud's chosen successor. Then it came apart, and one small scene tells you why. In 1909, in Freud's study, Jung raised the subject of the paranormal, and Freud dismissed it flatly. As they spoke, Jung felt a strange heat build in his chest, and at that moment a loud bang went off in the bookcase beside them, sharp enough that both men jumped. Jung told Freud he had just witnessed the very thing they were arguing about. Freud said nonsense. Jung replied that a second bang would come at once to prove it, and a moment later the bookcase cracked again, just as loud. Freud never quite forgave him. Jung tells the whole episode in his memoir, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. But the bookcase was a symbol, not the cause. The real split was intellectual. For Freud, the unconscious was basically a basement, a store of repressed drives, most of them sexual, pushed down out of sight. For Jung that was true but far too small. He kept seeing material in his patients that would not reduce to personal biography at all. Images and themes that seemed older and wider than any single life. He could not make the mind fit inside Freud's box, and he would not pretend it did. By 1913, the friendship was over, and Jung was on his own. Losing Freud cost him his footing. What followed, from about 1913 into the early 1920s, he later called his confrontation with the unconscious, and it was as close to a controlled breakdown as a working scientist has ever put on record. He was flooded with visions, inner voices, overwhelming images. Instead of medicating them away or filing them as symptoms, he did something extraordinary. He turned towards them and took notes. He developed a technique he called active imagination. He would deliberately lower the guard of the everyday mind, let the inner figures appear, then question them and argue with them as if they were real characters with their own points of view. One came back again and again, an old man with a kingfisher's wings he named Philemon, who seemed to know things Jung did not. He recorded all of it, the images, the dialogue, the paintings, in a large red leather book, Liber Novus, the Red Book, which stayed locked in a family vault and was not published until 2009. He did not treat this as illness to be cured. He did not treat it as revelation to be worshipped. He treated it as fieldwork, and he kept his scientist's notebook open the whole way down. Everything he built afterwards came out of that descent. The first and biggest piece is the one that split him from Freud. Jung proposed that under the personal unconscious, the private layer made of your own forgotten and repressed experience, there is a deeper layer that is not personal at all. Shared, inherited, roughly the same in everyone, the way the basic body plan is roughly the same in everyone. He called it the collective unconscious. His evidence was pattern. Working with patients and reading the myths and religions of cultures scattered across the world, he kept meeting the same handful of images and stories in people who could not possibly have borrowed them from one another. A patient would produce, in a dream, a symbol that matched some obscure ancient text they had never read. To Jung, the explanation was not coincidence and not telepathy. It was structure. We are all drawing from the same underground reservoir, and the reservoir has a shape. He was careful about what he was claiming. The collective unconscious does not hand you finished memories or ready-made pictures. It hands you tendencies. You are not born knowing the story of the hero who leaves home, faces death, and returns changed. You are born ready to recognize it the instant you hear it. Ask why every culture that ever existed arrived independently at a version of that story. Ask why children are gripped by exactly those tales long before anyone explains them. Jung's answer was that the mind comes preloaded, and that a great deal of what feels most personal is really the local expression of something we all carry. He gave that shared layer a cast of characters. He called them archetypes, and they are not people or pictures. They are more like the empty molds that experience keeps pouring itself into, the recurring roles in the drama every life stages. A few do most of the work. The persona is the face you put on for the world, the social mask, useful and necessary, a problem only when you forget it is a mask and mistake it for the whole of you. The shadow is everything about yourself you would rather not own, the pettiness, the appetites, the parts that got shoved out of sight. And Jung's point here was blunt. The shadow does not vanish when you disown it. It runs the show from behind, and you meet it as the thing you cannot stand in other people. The only way through is to turn and look at it. The anima and animus are the inner figures of the opposite sex, that color how we relate to others and to our own depths, the most dated of his ideas, but still pointing at something real. And the self is not the everyday ego, the small I that runs your day, but the organizing center of the whole psyche, conscious and unconscious together, the whole you are trying to become. Jung found that people moving towards it spontaneously drew a circle divided into four, a mandala. He drew one himself most mornings for years and watched its state track his own. The wise old man, the great mother, the trickster, the hero, the child. The list goes on, and you have met all of them, in every myth and most films. Star Wars runs on them on purpose. Most of the stories you love run on them whether they mean to or not. In 1921, he published Psychological Types and drew the distinction between the introvert, whose energy turns inward, and the extrovert, whose energy turns outward. If you have ever described yourself as one or the other, you are using Jung. He went further, adding 4 functions by which we take in and judge the world: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Decades later, Catherine Cook-Briggs and her daughter Isabel built that framework out into the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, now one of the most widely used personality questionnaires in the world. Millions of people find real value in it as a way to think about how they and the people around them are wired. It has its critics in academic psychology, mostly over how consistently it places the same person in the same type twice, and those are fair questions to hold. But the roots are genuinely his, and introversion and extroversion in particular have turned out to be one of the most robust and repeatedly confirmed dimensions in all of personality psychology. Jung was pointing at something real. All of it served one central idea, the most quietly radical thing he offered. He called it individuation, his answer to what a life is actually for. Most of the first half of life goes into building the ego and the persona, getting a foothold, a role, becoming somebody. Necessary work, but only half the job, and it leaves a great deal of you unlived, packed away in the shadow and the deeper layers, because it did not fit the version of yourself you were constructing. Individuation is the long second task, turning back towards all of that and slowly integrating it so the small conscious I comes into a working relationship with the whole. The goal is not happiness, and it is not perfection, it is wholeness. And notice the shape of that. It is not a matter of adding beliefs or acquiring things. It is a matter of clearing the interference between the conscious self and something larger that was always there underneath. Late in life, he pushed it further still, and he came back to the beetle. He gave events like that a name, synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence of an inner state and an outer event, with no causal link between them, and yet a significance that is hard to dismiss. Not one thing causing another. Two things, mind and matter, briefly rhyming as if the wall between inner and outer had gone thin. He did not think this through alone. His collaborator was Wolfgang Pauli, a Nobel physicist, a famously ruthless critic who coined the phrase "not even wrong" for ideas too muddled to bother testing. Pauli spent more than 2 decades writing to Jung about whether mind and matter could be joined by something other than cause. Two men, from the deep interior and the deep exterior, both landing on the same suspicion, that at some level the split between mind and matter is not fundamental. Jung gave that suspicion a name, the psychoid archetype, operating at a level below the divide, neither purely mental nor purely physical, but somehow both. And behind it an old alchemical idea he revived, the unus mundus, the one world, where mind and matter are two faces of a single underlying reality, and a synchronicity is a moment when the seam briefly shows. Now here is why this pulls at me, and why it keeps turning up in the questions I care about. Look at the shape of what Jung built. If the deep patterns of your mind are shared and inherited rather than manufactured privately by your own brain, then in some real sense, you are not generating them. You are drawing on them. You tune into a layer that was there before you and will be there after. That is a receiver model of the mind, arrived at from inside the consulting room instead of from physics, and it is close to what Itzhak Bentov reached from the other direction. The archetypes rhyme with Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, a layer of inherited form that shapes each new instance and that individuals draw on rather than invent. Synchronicity and the psychoid archetype sit right next to the physics of a consciousness field and a holographic universe, where the apparent separateness of things is surface and a deeper order connects them. Even individuation fits, because clearing the interference between the small self and the larger whole is, in receiver terms, cleaning up the signal. Jung was describing, in his own language, a lifetime spent becoming a clearer instrument. I am not going to pretend all of this is proven. The word association work is solid science. The introvert and extrovert distinction has held up remarkably well. The insight that we disown parts of ourselves and then meet them as trouble in other people barely needs defending. The collective unconscious and synchronicity are frameworks he could never nail down. And the honest problem with synchronicity is that the mind is a tireless pattern finder. It lights up at the one striking coincidence and quietly forgets the 1,000 beetles that tapped no windows. What stays with me is how Jung handled the parts he could not prove. He labeled them for what they were, reports from a frontier his instruments could not reach, and went on recording them with a scientist's care instead of looking away. For 60 years, at real professional cost, he stayed honest about which of his ideas were solid and which were not. And that is rarer than being right. He never proved the mind is a field. What he did was look as hard as anyone ever has at the inside of a mind, and come back reporting that it was never only yours. You are standing on a shared floor. You are drawing from a common well. The task of a life, in his account, is to stop mistaking the small lit room of the ego for the whole house, and to go and meet the rest of what you are. If this is landing for you, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people asking the same questions. And if you want the full story, the woman and the beetle, the break with Freud, the archetypes, and where all of it meets the bigger questions, you can read the whole thing at consciousnesspartnership.com.